Okay, so finally we have things working, right? So this is the video for objective 6A, solving the missing links using the properties of special right triangles. So one important note for 6A, we're going to be using triangles that are always right triangles. So that's the first thing. We're going to be looking at two specific cases, 45, 45, 90 triangles and 30, 60, 90 triangles. Let's start off with 45, 45, 90 triangles. So the property that we're going to look at just basically says in a triangle whose angles measure are 45, 45, and 90, the hypotenuse has a length equal to the product of the radical 2 and the length of either leg. So what we mean by that is when we have our right triangle and we know our angles are 45 and 45 and we have a certain length for our legs, we can find the length of our hypotenuse by multiplying it by the square root of 2. Okay? One quick note about the word hypotenuse. It's a vocabulary term that you'll need to memorize and know. A couple things about the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the longest leg. I'm sorry, always the longest side. And it is directly across from the 90-degree angle. So if my 90-degree angle is right here, I look straight across. It's directly opposite that side. So basically, know this term, remember it, memorize it. We're going to be using it repeatedly for the rest of the year, and you'll also be using it next year in Algebra 2. So let's look at a quick example. If we start off and we say x is 3. So for us to find the hypotenuse, we would simply multiply by radical 2. So we have 3 times radical 2, which is just 3 radical 2. Fairly basic. Don't make it more difficult than what it is. Just simply multiply and plug in for that x right there. So obviously, I will not be making it that easy or that straightforward sometimes. So let's look at a case where the side they give us is a radical. Let's say they tell us the side is radical 2. Actually, let me make a better example. Radical 3. So they tell me when one side is radical 3, well, these two sides are the same, so I know that this second side is radical 3. And to get my hypotenuse, I'm going to multiply radical 3, which is my x, times radical 2, which is equal to radical 6. Okay, so some interesting properties about radicals, because we're going to be working with them. The first, if we have two radicals that are the same, then when we multiply them together, we just get what's under the radical. Okay? If we have two radicals that are different, then we just multiply them under the radical, like we just did. So if we have the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, that'll give us 3. If we have the square root of 3 times the square root of 2, that'll give us the square root of 6. So some basics about radicals as a brief aside. So that's how we do 45, 45, 90 triangles. The way that we find our missing side or our missing length can be done using our chart. So every time we do a problem, we're going to reference our chart that you will have to actually memorize. We're going to see what we're missing, what we're given in this first part, in this first column. Then we're going to see what we're missing in our second column, and our third column tells us how to actually go about doing that. So if we look at our first example, they give us a leg. And so we go to our chart, we say, oh, we're missing a leg. We're going to find the hypotenuse, and we do that by multiplying the leg by the square root of 2. So to find the hypotenuse, we're going to take 7 multiplied by the square root of 2, which is just going to be 7 square root of 2. So we can say B is equal to 7 square root of 2. Now for A, remember it's a 45, 45, 90 triangle, so A is the same as 7. The legs are the same. Let me write that a little bit neater for you. So A is equal to 7. For our second example, we have a hypotenuse that we're given. So we're given our hypotenuse right here, and we're missing our leg. So the way that we do that is we divide by the square root of 2. So what we're going to do to find D and C is to take 16, our hypotenuse, and divide it by the square root of 2. Now, the interesting piece about this in working with radicals is that we cannot have a radical in the denominator right here. We have to move this up top, or into the numerator. The way that we do that is by rationalizing. So what rationalizing looks like, we'll rewrite. Rationalizing just means multiplying the numerator and the denominator, the top and the bottom, by the radical. When I do that, I have 16 times square root of 2 in the numerator, so 16 square root of 2. And as we stated in the previous slide, when we have two radicals multiplied by each other that are the same, we just get the number underneath the radical, so 2. So now we have this fraction 16 radical 2 divided by 2. Also important for you to note, radical 2 does not equal 2. They are two separate numbers. One common mistake is for people to equate them or to think that they equal each other. They do not. 2 is the actual number 2. Radical 2 is a different number altogether. If you were to put radical 2 into your calculator, you'd see that it comes out to be 1 point something something something. So do not equate them in your head. What we'll do here, though, back to our problem, is we'll simplify the 16 and the 2. So 16 divided by 2 is just going to be 8. So our answer is going to be 8 radical 2. So since D is equal to 8 radical 2, then C is also equal to 8 radical 2. Let's look at 30, 60, 90 triangles. So 30, 60, 90 triangles are, again, a special type of right triangle. In a triangle whose angles measures are 30, 60, and 90, the hypotenuse has a length equal to twice the length of the shorter leg, and the length of the longer leg is a product of radical 3 and the length of the shorter leg. So in looking at our drawing, our diagram, the first thing we're always going to do is to label our angles that we don't know and to label our sides. So this angle is 30, this angle is 60. I know that because 30 is across from x and 60 is across from x radical 3. Let me clean this up a little bit. I know that 2x is my hypotenuse. My short side is x. My long side is x radical 3. And I misspoke. We're going to call them legs so we don't get them confused with the hypotenuse. So short leg, long leg, hypotenuse. So some problems. So again, when we're solving problems, we use our chart. We look at what we were given by the drawing or by the diagram, what we want to find, and follow the steps on how to find it. So in our first example, we have 30, so we know this is 60, and we're going to label our legs. So 4 square root of 2 is across from 30, or is opposite of 30. Let me draw that clear for you. So it's directly opposite of 30. So this is the short side. Across or opposite of 90 is my x. So this is my hypotenuse. And this means that's my long leg. 60. So now let's go through and look at our chart. So our chart tells us that we have two options. We're given the short leg, and we're looking for, we can either look for the long leg or the hypotenuse. I'm going to choose the hypotenuse just because it's the first on the list. It tells me to multiply my short leg by 2. I don't have, oh yeah, I do. I multiply my short leg by 2. So the way that works, my hypotenuse, x, is going to be equal to my short leg times 2. Now when I multiply, this 2 is not under the radical sign, so I'm just going to multiply it by the 4. So I'm going to have 4 times 2 and the radical 2, which is just 8 radical 2. And for my long side, let's look at what I have. So I now have my short leg, and I have my hypotenuse, and I want to find the long leg. So if I look at my chart and I say, well, I have the hypotenuse, well, I can only find my short leg. So I have to use my short leg again right here, because that's going to allow me to find my long leg. And what it tells me to do is to multiply my short leg by radical 3. So for y, I'm going to take my short leg, and it looks like I'm going to run a little bit into the problem. So multiply by radical 3. And remember what we said, when we're multiplying radicals, they're just both under the radical. 2 times 3. So I get 4 radical 6. So x and y, x is 8 square root of 2. That's the length of my hypotenuse. And the length of my long leg is 4 radical 6. So clean that up a little bit so we have space for our next problem. We have our triangle. We'll label that 30. So 60 is across from our long leg, so y is our long leg. 90 is across from our hypotenuse, so x is our hypotenuse. And our short leg this time is 9 over 2. So let's go up to our chart again. We're given the short leg. We're going to find our hypotenuse. Take some of these dots off of here so it's clear. So I have my short leg. I'm going to find my hypotenuse, and the way that I do that is I multiply it by 2. So my hypotenuse x is going to equal 9 over 2 times 2. And basic tells us that our 2's cancel out, so that our hypotenuse is equal to 9. Let's look at y. Y is the long leg. We don't know it yet, but we do have a short leg. We have our long leg, and it tells us to multiply the short leg by the square root of 3. So the way that looks, we have our short leg. We're going to multiply it by the square root of 3. Now, there's not much we can do with this, because 9 times square root of 3 is just square root of 3. I can't divide. I can't multiply with that square root of 3. It's just going to sit there. So 9 square root of 3 all over 2. So I have x and I have y. That's everything for this unit. We'll talk to you again during B and C.